Hi, my name's Avon. My family didn't notice when I left the state. Or maybe they did, and just didn't care. I wasn't invited to my sister's engagement party, not even a message. But when the wedding came, my father called, not to ask, to order. "Come home," he said. "Stand there. Smile. Make the family look perfect." And when I said no, he threatened to cut me off. What he didn't know. I make more than all of them combined, but here's what hurts more. I wasn't disowned that day. I'd been erased long before. And the day their perfect wedding fell apart was the day they finally remembered my name. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening to this? And where are you? Drop a comment. I read everyone. I used to wonder if silence could be loud, if the absence of words, the absence of concern, could ring in your ears louder than screaming. 6 months ago, I moved from Texas to California, and not a single person in my family noticed. Not my father. Not my mother, not my sister Celine, whose wedding they're planning like it's the social event of the year. I left, quietly, packed my things, signed the lease on a small apartment in San Jose, and started a new job. No one asked where I was. No one cared. And somehow, that hurt more than I'll admit. I looked around my half-empty apartment, sunlight streaming through blinds I never got around to replacing. The place felt like a halfway house between who I was and who I wanted to be. Boxes lined the floor, each one taped shut like a promise to myself. I'd landed a new role at a software firm. Remote, well-paying, mine. I didn't need to be someone's backdrop anymore. The sound of packing tape tearing filled the silence, the kind of silence I'd gotten used to. The kind of silence where no one calls, not because they're giving you space, but because they forgot you exist. I crouched next to the last open box, folding my old hoodie, the one I used to wear every Thanksgiving back home, sitting in the corner while everyone praised Celine for something. A new job, a new boyfriend, her latest photo shoot. I'd been background for so long, I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be anything else. That's when my phone rang. It was 2 days ago. His name didn't even flash on the screen, just unknown caller. And yet somehow I knew. I answered. "Avon." My father's voice, sharp and impatient. He didn't ask how I was, didn't ask where I'd been, just said my name like it was a task he was late to finish. "Celine's wedding is next month. You'll come home." No question, just a command. "Why?" "You know why." His tone dropped, like speaking to a child. "You'll stand beside your sister, smile, be part of the family photo. The guests will expect everyone together. We need to look perfect." Look perfect. Not be perfect. Not be family. Look like it's a photo shoot, not a wedding. Like I'm a stage prop. He kept talking, listing flight times, dates, like my attendance was assumed. As if my absence for half a year was a glitch, something he could patch over with a family picture. I stood there, phone cold against my ear, heart beating in a way I didn't recognize, not fear, not sadness, something heavier. "I'm not coming." It came out quieter than I'd expected. I didn't scream. I didn't explain. I didn't beg to be understood. Just said no. For a few seconds, silence stretched between us. Then he barked, "Don't be ridiculous, Avon. You'll come. You always do." Not this time. I hung up. After that call, I stood in the middle of my apartment for a long time. My breathing felt wrong, too shallow. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from something I couldn't name. I pressed my palms to my thighs and whispered to myself, trying to remember how to steady my own heartbeat. Why did saying no feel so strange? Like betraying a version of myself who stayed silent, who stayed obedient, for far too long. I taped the last box closed. No one had asked where I lived for 6 months. Not my father, not Celine, not my mother. And somehow, I knew they wouldn't remember my address, even if I told them. I sat down on the hardwood floor, the last rays of sun filtering through my dusty blinds. I should have felt free, but instead, I felt like something inside me had cracked, and I wasn't sure if it was breaking or mending. I whispered to no one. I don't think they even know where I live now. I sat there on the floor, looking at the taped boxes like they might answer me. The words I'd just whispered lingered in the air longer than they should have. It wasn't just that my family didn't know where I lived, it was that they didn't care. Not until they needed something from me. Not until Celine's wedding became the next thing that had to look perfect. That's when they remembered I existed. Not as a person, not as their daughter, but as a prop. I pulled myself up slowly, brushing dust off my jeans. A dry laugh escaped me. They didn't even notice I moved, but now I'm needed as decoration. My apartment felt too small all of a sudden. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself the last of the coffee sitting cold in the pot, and stood there leaning against the counter. The bitter taste matched something in my throat. 3 months ago, I was scrolling through my phone like any normal Saturday. I remember the exact moment my stomach sank. There it was, clear as day, on Mom's Facebook page. Celine's engagement party. Pictures. Videos. The whole family, beaming, lined up like a magazine spread. Celebrating our perfect family and Celine's next chapter, the caption read. 57 pictures. Not one of me. My name wasn't mentioned. No one called. No text. Nothing. The venue looked expensive. A hotel ballroom, decorated in gold and white, champagne flutes, caviar on crackers, the works. I'd never even heard of the place. Guests posed with my parents like they were celebrities. Celine wore the dress Mom always wanted her to wear, off the shoulder, cinched waist, hair swept back to show the Holloway cheekbones. Dad stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder like he was staking a claim. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't forgotten. I was erased. I set my phone down that day and just sat there, staring at nothing for a long time. And the worst part? I wasn't surprised. Later that evening, Sarah and Mike came over. I hadn't planned to tell them anything, but I think Sarah saw it on my face before I said a word. She always did. She sat on the couch beside me, waiting until I spoke. There was a party, I said flatly. Engagement party. For Celine? Mike asked, frowning. I nodded. Sarah's brows pulled together. And you didn't go? I wasn't invited. Mike swore softly under his breath. Sarah just whispered, "Oh, Avon." I shook my head, trying to swallow the lump forming in my throat. Mom posted it everywhere. Sarah leaned in like she wanted to fix something. Why don't you call your mom and ask why? Just ask. Because I know what she'll say. I didn't have to think about it. She'll say, "Oh, that. It wasn't a big deal." That's how it always worked. Pretend nothing happened. Pretend I was overreacting. Pretend I wasn't the invisible daughter in every picture. Mike shifted uncomfortably. You should have been there, Avon. Should I? I asked, too tired to pretend. I stayed silent after that. In the weeks after the party, while I packed my life into boxes and prepared for a fresh start, no one would notice. Something else dawned on me. No one in my family knew what I did for work. No one asked. 2 weeks before Celine's engagement party, I'd been promoted. Senior product manager, 6-figure salary. My company even featured me in their quarterly newsletter. I sat there one night, looking at the certificate framed on my desk, and whispered the words I'd never said aloud. I make more than all of them combined. It wasn't pride. It wasn't even relief. It was realization. Their approval wasn't necessary anymore. Their opinions weren't currency I needed to trade in. I wasn't the child waiting for permission to exist. I ran a hand through my hair, looking around my half-packed apartment like I might find pieces of myself I'd lost over the years. Maybe they weren't ignoring me. Maybe they'd rewritten the family story. Without me. Maybe I'd never been the background daughter. Maybe I'd been edited out completely. I looked down at my phone. Dad's last voicemail was still sitting there, unopened. He hadn't called to ask how I was. He'd called to give an order. And when I said no, silence. And then, they dared to ask me to pretend I'm part of that story. I stayed standing in my kitchen longer than I meant to. The silence in that apartment felt louder than it ever had. Maybe because, for the first time, I finally understood it wasn't an accident. The silence had always been there. I just wasn't ready to admit it. Not until now. They never wanted me. Not really. I was just something convenient. Something that could stand in the background when needed. I carried the cold coffee back to the living room, sitting down on the floor, my back against the same box I'd packed that morning. My fingers traced the edges of the cardboard, steady but distant, like my body was moving but my mind had stepped away. I remembered a different kind of box. I was 9. It was the first time I thought maybe my dad could be proud of me. There was a small robotics competition at the community center in Austin. I built this clumsy, blinking machine that barely worked, but somehow, I won. I remember how my hands shook when they handed me that plastic trophy. Grandma Inez was the only one who cared. She took me out for ice cream, said we should write a thank you letter to my dad. She thought he'd want to hear about it. I let myself believe her. We sat at her kitchen table. I remember the yellow wallpaper behind her, the smell of her coffee. She helped me spell out the words. I wrote that I missed him, that I wanted him to come to the next competition. I gave the letter to my mom that night. She glanced at it, then tossed it into the trash like it was junk mail. "We're too busy planning David's soccer banquet." She said it so casually, like I should have known. That was when I learned, stop hoping. I leaned my head back against the box now, eyes closed. So many years later, I could still remember the sound the letter made hitting the bottom of that trash can. A few days ago, Grandma Inez had called me. Her voice sounded thinner now, older. She asked if I'd received the envelope. At first, I didn't know what she meant. Then it arrived, a wedding invitation, sent to her address by mistake, probably because my mother forgot where I lived. Inez had forwarded it to me, thinking, hoping, it was personal, but the envelope didn't even have my name. It said, "To the Creed family member in California." I'd held that envelope in my hands for nearly an hour, not angry, not sad, just empty. I traced the printed letters, smooth and impersonal. Family member. I wasn't even worth a name anymore. The invitation was heavy, expensive cardstock, cream-colored, with gold lettering, embossed with Celine and her fiancé's initials in cursive at the top. I remembered holding that invitation over the trash can, hand trembling, but I didn't let it fall. Somehow, throwing it away felt too much like finishing something I wasn't ready to end. Instead, I left it on my desk. Just sitting there, staring at me, like proof that I hadn't imagined any of this. I tried to feel something. Rage. Grief. Anything. But nothing came. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was emptiness. A hollow space where something should have been, and that terrified me more than anything. I wondered, for the first time, if maybe I'd misunderstood everything. What if they hadn't overlooked me? What if they'd just never wanted me? What if my entire childhood wasn't neglect, but quiet rejection? I thought about all those years of standing behind David and Celine in every photo, always a little too far left or right, so someone's shoulder or elbow cut me out of frame. No one ever noticed, not even me. It wasn't until I got older that I realized, maybe they'd been editing me out all along. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that looked cruel, just a quiet, deliberate choice to crop me out of their story. And now they'd finally made it official. I stood slowly and crossed the apartment to where the invitation still sat. I picked it up again, felt its weight one more time. My voice barely sounded like mine when I whispered, "They erased me. Officially." I sat there, staring at the nameless invitation, my fingertips tracing the rough edge of the envelope over and over, like it might suddenly spell my name if I waited long enough. That thought was almost funny, in the way dry humor keeps you from breaking. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. That's when my phone rang. I didn't look at the screen. I didn't need to. Only one person called me anymore without texting first. Only one person assumed I'd always pick up. I answered without saying a word. There was silence for a second. Then, his voice. "I assume you got the invitation." I didn't respond. "Don't start with the attitude, Avon. You're needed back home. Celine's wedding is next month. It's time to act like part of this family." Still, I said nothing. His tone hardened. "Don't make me spell this out. You're the missing creed. We've let you drift long enough. Your sister needs you there." I finally spoke, but my voice came out too soft. "Why?" A pause. Then he laughed, short and humorless. "For appearances, of course. You're a creed, and we need to look like one family." For appearances. I felt something shift inside me, a thread snapping. Not loudly, quietly, like a bridge collapsing somewhere far in the distance. I swallowed the answer I wanted to give and whispered instead, "So that's all I am now." His voice, colder than I remembered, snapped through the receiver. "If you're not on that plane in 2 weeks, don't bother calling this number again." He hung up. I let the silence settle like dust. The screen went dark, reflecting my own face back at me. I barely recognized it. 3 days passed. I didn't reply to him. I didn't explain myself. I didn't apologize. I simply existed. Went to work, answered emails, drove home in traffic like any other adult in California living a life no one else noticed. Until the message came. It arrived late in the evening, while I was sitting in my apartment, half listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Just a simple text. Just 13 words. "If you refuse to show up, you will be removed from the will." No signature. No greeting. No question mark. I stared at it for so long, my screen dimmed. And then, I laughed. Not a joyful laugh. Not even a bitter one. It was dry, hollow, quiet. They thought I stayed all those years because of money. I leaned back in my chair and whispered to no one, "They think I cared. I make more money than all of them put together." I knew that wasn't something to brag about. I'd never said it to anyone. But that moment, it felt important, not as pride, as freedom. My father thought inheritance was leverage. He thought money bought loyalty. Maybe for David, for Celine, not for me. And that realization, that's when the sadness cracked. It wasn't grief anymore. It wasn't disappointment. It was something simpler, something colder. I wasn't sad. I was angry. I looked at that text, that simple threat to erase me financially after erasing me emotionally for decades, and I felt the strangest clarity settle over me. Like fog lifting from a coastline I'd memorized but never dared to map. For the first time in my life, I saw them for what they were. Not family, just people who wanted to control their narrative. And I was no longer a character in their story. I put my phone down gently, almost respectfully, like it had delivered the final message I needed to hear. Then I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, San Jose blinked with the quiet rhythm of a city that didn't know my name. Didn't care. And yet, for the first time, that anonymity felt like safety. I whispered aloud, to no one. They thought money bought my silence. And I smiled. I remember sitting there that morning, the sunlight barely slipping through the blinds, my phone still in my hand after his last message. It should have hurt more. It didn't. That was the strange part. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't anything. Silence wasn't surrender. It wasn't weakness. Somewhere between that last threat and this cold morning, silence had turned into something else. It became strategy. I looked around my apartment, its walls bare now, the boxes half sealed and waiting near the door. I didn't even know where I was moving next, not really. Freedom sounded easy until you held it. It felt like glass, fragile, easy to drop. I told myself I wanted distance, space from them, from everything. Then my phone rang. The caller ID showed only one word: Inez. I let it ring once before answering. Her voice was thin, not like the strong woman I remembered. "Avon, sweetheart." She hesitated. I heard her take a breath, and I knew whatever came next wasn't small. "I wanted to be the one to tell you before you heard it from someone else." I closed my eyes. "Tell me." "They took you out." I frowned. "Took me out of what?" "The family registry, the church, the property documents. Your name's gone, as if you were never born." I didn't speak. I couldn't. Her voice cracked when she added, "You no longer exist to them, Avon." I should have cried. But all I felt was a strange, hollow clarity, like something that had been muddled and aching inside me finally clicked into place. That was when I stopped being sad. We stayed on the line like that for a while. Neither of us said anything else. Eventually, I heard her whisper, "I'm sorry," before the call ended. I sat there, staring at the boxes, thinking about nothing at all. Hours passed. I must have moved at some point because I found myself curled up near the couch, my laptop open in front of me, logged into a social media account I rarely used. Not mine, a cousin's, distant enough to be harmless, and that's when I saw it. A photo. Celine, smiling at some charity brunch. The caption didn't mention me. Of course it didn't. But the comments? That's where I found the real damage. Poor Celine. Must be so hard with her sister's episodes. I heard she's been in and out of clinics. Bless the family for handling it so gracefully. I scrolled. More of the same. Distant relatives, old friends of my parents, neighbors who barely remembered me, all whispering the same lie. My absence wasn't erasure. It was a breakdown. My silence wasn't rejection. It was treatment. I closed the laptop. They weren't just forgetting me. They were replacing me. They wanted people to believe I was gone because I was broken. Easier to pity the missing sister than explain why she didn't show up to the engagement party. Or the wedding. I sat on the floor, hugging my knees to my chest, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself ask the question I'd been avoiding. Was silence the wrong choice? Had I let them win? Maybe I was playing dead in a war I didn't even start. I stayed there until the sky outside turned from blue to gray. I didn't turn on any lights. At some point, my phone buzzed again. Not a call, just a message from my father. "If you refuse to show up, you will be removed from the will." I laughed. Not loudly, not with humor, just a hollow, breathless sound. That's what they thought. They thought I stayed silent for money. I looked around my empty apartment, the small life I'd built, the career they never asked about, the six-figure salary they didn't even know existed. And I realized something with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I didn't want their money. I didn't want their approval. What I wanted was for them to regret underestimating me. They erased me on paper, on church rosters, in gossip circles. But I was still here. And silence? Silence wasn't surrender. It was the start of something else. They erased me. On purpose. That thought circled my mind like smoke caught inside a glass. But smoke dissipates. This didn't. It thickened, heavy, choking, until clarity pushed through. They treated me like I was already gone. But I'm not. I sat on the edge of my bed, the nameless invitation still in my lap. The silence of my apartment wasn't comforting anymore. It felt like a verdict. I let it linger a moment longer than I should have, before standing up, almost mechanical. If they wanted silence, I'd give them something better. Evidence. 2 days passed before Inez called again. Her voice cracked before she spoke, and when she did, it wasn't the warm, grounding tone I knew. It was fear. Avon, there's something you need to know. I leaned against the kitchen counter. Go ahead. She hesitated, then broke down, words tumbling between shallow breaths. Years ago, your father asked me to co-sign some documents. He said it was paperwork, standard updates after your grandfather passed. I trusted him. I signed. A pause. The house in Austin? The one your college savings helped renovate. It's under Celine's name now, legally. You don't own a brick of it. I didn't speak. The silence wasn't from shock. It was something colder. Inez whispered, I didn't know, Avon. I swear. I closed my eyes. I believe you. Her breath hitched. I'm mailing the documents. You need to see for yourself. I nodded, though she couldn't see. Okay. Sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I hung up before the apologies buried me. I stood in the center of my apartment, unmoving, for what felt like hours. Maybe it was only minutes. I couldn't tell anymore. My chest didn't hurt. My eyes didn't sting. Maybe they won. That thought came quieter than the others, and for a moment, I almost let it settle. But the knock came next. Not on my door, on my phone. A message from Inez. A photograph. A scanned page, its header unmistakable. Last will and testament. Her follow-up text, shaky but clear. I found this in your grandfather's box, hidden under old tax files. I sat down hard, staring at the image. In the original will, I was named, not as an afterthought, not as a charity clause, as an equal. I read the names again, slower this time. David Creed. Celine Creed. Avon Creed. I was there. Inez called before I could reply to the photo. It's real, Avon. Your grandfather never removed you. Your father. He forged the update after he died. The words came like facts from Inez. But for me, they landed like slow, deliberate punches. I said nothing. Avon, what do you want me to do? My voice returned steady. Scan every page. Send it to me. She sobbed softly, then promised, I will. The call ended. I sat still, the kind of stillness that doesn't come from exhaustion, but from decision. Let them talk. Let them post. Let them spread their gossip. Because now I had something stronger. I pulled the stack of documents from my kitchen table. The mail Inez had overnighted, now scattered like the debris of my former life. Property transfers, bank statements, church registry deletions, and now the original will, all laid out before me. I reached for my phone, scrolled to a name I hadn't used in years. Liam Ashbury. Not a friend, not anymore, but a lawyer. He'd once told me at some bitter college reunion, when family betrays you, paper wins. I texted him 4 words. Are you still quiet? Minutes later, his reply arrived. For you? Always. I exhaled, long and slow. Then, I need help. Without asking why, he responded, send everything. I spent the next 3 hours scanning, sorting, naming files. My fingers shook once, halfway through, when Inez's scanned pages loaded, My name, in black ink, next to my siblings. I wasn't missing. They erased me on purpose. But now, I had proof I'd once existed. And evidence carries weight. Silence never could. I compiled everything into a folder. Liam texted again. Got it. I'll review tonight. Talk at dawn. I set the phone down. Then I sat, eyes open but unfocused, until night surrendered to morning. Paper trails. That's what they never expected. Not from me. Not from the daughter they thought had vanished into silence. I sat at my dining table that morning, laptop open, sunlight filtering through half-drawn blinds. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I didn't care. What mattered were the scanned documents, the attorney's emails, and the quiet war I was finally prepared to fight. I leaned back, eyes steady on the screen. Every property title, every forged will, every false signature, it all left marks. Marks that could be followed, tracked, proved. That's what they forgot. Paper trails don't disappear just because you pretend someone doesn't exist. What they didn't expect, I said quietly to myself, was that erasing me came with a receipt. And now it was time to collect. I spent the next 2 days in near silence, speaking only when necessary. My lawyer, Jonah, didn't need me to explain much. I sent him every document Inez had mailed. He read quietly, asked pointed questions, and when I hesitated about whether to proceed, he said one thing. Do you want this to stop? I just nodded. Then we make it public. It wasn't rage driving me anymore. That emotion had burned itself out. What I carried now was sharper, cleaner. It felt like control. By the end of the week, Jonah had filed pre-litigation notices against the Creed estate for asset misappropriation, titles, financial fraud, documented erasure, all neat professional language that barely scratched the surface of what they had done. And then, Jonah asked how I wanted them served. I said, timing matters. He nodded once, understanding. On the morning of Celine's wedding rehearsal, those envelopes, thick, legally stamped, were quietly delivered to the Creed family attorney, in front of Celine's future in-laws, in front of their pastor, in front of the same people who believed every word my family had spread about me. I didn't need to be there. My name on those papers was enough. Inez texted me minutes later. They're opening the envelopes now. I didn't reply. At noon, Inez called. Your father's face, Avon. He went white. Celine was shaking. People asked questions. Let them, I said. That night, Jonah forwarded a photo someone at the rehearsal had posted online. A candid shot, but clear enough. Celine crying. My father shouting, finger pointed in someone's face. I saved it without flinching. But I wasn't done. 3 days later, Inez did what I couldn't. The family brunch before the wedding was meant to be their last image of perfection, a staged event to convince Celine's new in-laws of their polished family history. Inez arrived early, invitation in hand, but she carried something else. The original will. Inez told me afterward how it happened. She walked straight to the table where Celine's fiancé's parents sat. She set the document in front of them and said in a voice everyone could hear, "This is the truth about Avon Holloway." David stood up, trying to pull her away. Celine begged her to stop, but the papers had already been touched, already read. People saw the names. My name. Someone snapped a photo. A guest, perhaps. It didn't matter. Inez said Celine was sobbing. I asked Inez, "Did you say anything else?" She paused, voice trembling. No. They saw enough. After that, Jonah confirmed my family tried to suppress the incident, asking guests to delete photos, but it was too late. Enough people knew. And my father? He fired the family attorney. I sat at my table that evening, reading the quiet updates Jonah sent. No commentary. Just facts. Inez's short, shaking texts. And the photo. Always the photo. I wasn't angry. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't anything. My coffee was cold again. My apartment, silent. Justice isn't victory. It's proof. It's proof I existed. And that day, for the first time, I wasn't the invisible sister anymore. But they weren't finished. Not yet. I sat in my apartment, phone resting face down on the table, my laptop open but untouched. A single message from Inez blinked quietly on the screen. The wedding's today. Outside my window, San Jose carried on like nothing mattered. I could almost envy that, because a few thousand miles away, my family was preparing to celebrate without me, as they'd always planned. But this time, I wasn't going to pretend I didn't exist. Not anymore. Hours passed. I didn't move much. Updates trickled in from Inez, short, simple lines. They started late. Celine's tense. Guests asking where you are. And then came the first real shift. Inez's message read, "The in-laws got the letter." I leaned back, exhaled, and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere inside that Texas venue, while they were stringing up fairy lights and polishing champagne flutes, my lawyer's paperwork had arrived, delivered into the hands of Celine's future in-laws. The real will, the proof, the simple truth that I had always existed, no matter how hard my family tried to write me out. I didn't need to be there. Presence wasn't required to make noise. Inez's next message was shaky. "They're talking!" I could picture it without effort. My father, standing stiff in his suit, lips tightening the way they did whenever he was cornered. My mother's forced smiles cracking as questions piled up. Celine's fiancé hearing, perhaps for the first time, that the sister-in-law he was told to ignore had been part of the inheritance all along. The unraveling had begun. By the time Inez sent Celine's crying, "It's public," I'd stopped reading for a moment. I didn't feel victory. There was no joy in this, just a cold, exhausted certainty. They wanted a perfect wedding. Instead, they got questions they couldn't answer in front of champagne and flowers. I let my tea go cold beside me. Hours later, after the reception had collapsed and guests were leaving early, a name I hadn't expected appeared on my screen. Emily, David's wife. For a long minute, I just stared at her name, and then I pressed play. Her voice was quiet, but clear. "Avon, I thought you should hear this. I'm sending it, because I'm tired of all of them." Then silence, until another voice took over. David. Drunk. Rambling. Angry. I mean, what were we supposed to do? Keep her in the photos? Dad said she'd just embarrass everyone. Hell, we erased her for a reason. She didn't belong in this family's future. The audio ended there. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just saved the file. I didn't post it publicly. No messy spectacle. Instead, I forwarded it directly to Celine's fiancé's family. Quiet, precise, like a scalpel. It wasn't about revenge. It was about removing the last piece of their narrative, their lie that erasing me had ever been about anything other than shame. I watched as message after message came through from Inez. Celine's fiancé walked out. People heard. Mom's denying everything. Then finally, they're leaving early. And that was it. The wedding that was supposed to crown Celine as the family's pride had collapsed under the weight of their own lies, not with shouting, not with scandal posted online, just quiet truths landing where they needed to. I sat still, my screen glowing soft blue against the dark. I didn't feel like a winner. I wasn't celebrating. There was no speech to give, no champagne toast waiting. I didn't win. I just stopped losing. And when my phone vibrated one final time that night, it wasn't Inez, it wasn't Emily, it wasn't even David. It was my father. A single text. Avon. My name. For the first time in years, They called me by my name. By then, it didn't matter anymore. I remember thinking that as I watched their messages pile up, missed calls, voicemails I never listened to, even my mother's text, the one that said, "Can we talk just once, please?" felt like it came from a stranger. Weeks had passed since the wedding collapse, since their carefully painted picture shattered in front of people who, for once, weren't blind to me. I thought maybe I'd feel something. Satisfaction, relief, maybe even triumph. But mostly, I felt done. I sat in the small house I bought on the outskirts of San Jose at the edge of the hills. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, a yard big enough for a vegetable patch I wasn't quite sure how to care for yet. But it was mine. Paid with my work, not my family's name. There was peace in that. Every morning, I'd make coffee and sit on the back step, watching the fog roll in from the mountains. I'd reply to a few work emails, join meetings when I needed to. The silence wasn't heavy here. It was clean. No voices pressing on me, no expectations curled around every word. No one asking me to stand still and smile for a photo I wasn't meant to be in. Inez came to visit once, quietly. She didn't say much, just unpacked a few boxes I hadn't touched yet, like she always did when words weren't enough. And that's when she found it. I knew what it was before she unwrapped it, even before the paper slid off. The old wooden picture frame. Dark oak. Slightly chipped in one corner from the time I'd knocked it off the shelf by accident when I was 10. Inside it was me, a photo from years ago. I was maybe 8, holding a science fair ribbon, face half hidden behind hair too long for my face back then. Inez must have kept it safe all this time. She didn't ask if I wanted to hang it. She just left it next to me on the kitchen counter and went outside to tend to the overgrown rosemary bush near the porch. I stood there holding that frame for longer than I'll admit. Some part of me thought, maybe I should put it up. Maybe that's what healing was supposed to look like, claiming those lost pieces, giving them space again. But as the afternoon sun shifted through the kitchen window, I knew I didn't need to see that girl on the wall. She was already in me. She'd survived. I slid the frame gently into the bottom drawer of my bedroom dresser, closed it softly, whispered into the quiet, almost too low for even myself to hear. Some stories don't need walls. Inez didn't ask where I put it. She knew. Later that evening, when the house smelled faintly of mint and fresh earth from her gardening, we sat on the porch without saying much. She poured tea. I sipped mine. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I could breathe without apology. At some point, my phone vibrated again. Another message. I didn't look. "They still calling?" Inez asked softly. I nodded. Planning to answer? I shook my head. And then, for her sake more than mine, I said aloud, "I don't hate them." She looked at me for a long moment. "You don't have to." I understood then. Forgiveness wasn't required to heal. I didn't wish them harm. I just didn't wish to answer. Not anymore. Their silence now was my freedom. Days passed. Work resumed. The house settled around me, growing less like an escape and more like a home. I learned which neighbors walked their dogs past my fence, which local bakery overcharged but made bread worth every penny. And yet, one box remained, unopened, in the hallway. I knew what was inside. It wasn't Inez who unpacked it. It wasn't her place. Late one evening, after finishing some work, I sat by the box and opened it. Inside, near the top, lay the draft of the letter. The one I'd written to my father months before everything fell apart. Pages and pages, trying to explain myself, trying to ask why. Why wasn't I enough? Why did they need me invisible? I held the letter in shaking hands. And then, without reading a word, I tore it up, piece by piece, slowly, deliberately. I watched the scraps fall into the trash can beside me, soft as snowfall. No rage, no sadness, just release. I didn't need his answers anymore. I didn't need anything from them. I wasn't erased. I was just missing from the wrong story, and I had no interest in rejoining it.